Hello guys, Abel here, back with another video. And just as a heads up, I have this little white noise source in these headphones, and I might be putting them on at some point because around this time every day, there is this dog in the neighborhood that hysterically starts barking, and that I just cannot concentrate when that happens. So that might happen at some point, and I might not be speaking as articulately, not that I'm speaking super articulately anyway. But nevertheless, in this video, I want to talk about autoregulatory eating, or basically not tracking your macros and achieving your fitness goals that way. And I'm gonna be splitting this up into 2 or 3, maybe even 4 videos. I heard that that's a good thing for the algorithm, and maybe I will have a better chance at reaching all of you guys or more of you guys because it's not a 25-minute video, but only 10 or 15 minutes. And I think it's timely that I do this because I just took it for granted that people just know that this is something that I'm about and this is part of my fitness philosophy, that I don't track macros and everybody knows that. But then I realized that the last time I talked about this was maybe 2 years ago, and since then my subscriber count went up by a couple of thousand, so probably it's timely that I talk about this once again. So in this first video, what I want to do is I want to clarify a couple of misconceptions about this topic and shed some more clear light on the topic, I guess. Because a lot of people are talking about this topic, talking about what happens when you don't track macros, and a lot of people just dismiss any other approach that doesn't involve macro tracking. And I think often that comes from people who are just simply talking about something else. So when I'm talking about not tracking macros and achieving your fitness goals that way, I am talking about a specific set of behaviors, habits, and strategies. And when those people are talking about it, I think they are just talking about something else. So the first thing that I want to clear up is that not tracking macros and intuitive eating are not the same thing. So just in the same way as macro tracking and if it fits your macros are not the same thing, intuitive eating is a very specific thing that means a very specific set of strategies, and not tracking macros by itself does not have to mean intuitive eating. So intuitive eating was designed many, many years ago by dietitians, and the goal of intuitive eating never involved achieving any sort of body composition goal. So it was designed to help people develop a better relationship with food, getting them in tune with their hunger and satiety mechanisms, and very crucially, that was a weight-neutral approach. It was never designed with the goal of achieving a specific body fat percentage or body composition or anything like that. What I'm doing, while I like a lot of those principles from intuitive eating, and in fact I incorporate a lot of those myself, it is definitely not a weight-neutral approach. So I, myself, want to be lean and muscular. So if I felt great about myself, I had a great relationship with food, but I was 25% body fat, let's say, me personally, I would not feel comfortable with that, at this point at least. Maybe later at one point I will. But what I'm trying to do with this strategy, which involves not tracking macros, is I want to push myself out of my comfort zone a little bit, and I'm using specific strategies to keep myself a little bit leaner compared to where I would be hanging out if I just listened to my hunger signals and satiety signals, which I definitely do, but if I just did that, I would not be as lean as I can be this way that I'm deploying all of those strategies, okay? So intuitive eating is a great thing, but that's not the same thing as what I'm doing. And not tracking macros by itself does not mean intuitive eating, okay? So that's the first thing that I want to clear up. The second thing I want to clear up is sort of the absurdity of the claim that not tracking macros means that you will get fat. Okay, so I think a lot of fit pros, people in the fitness industry, they are so used to tracking macros by this point, and they have been doing it for so many years, and they have been using it with all their clients for so many years that they just naturally assume that anything else will result in bad results. And I also think that a lot of these people are coming from a background of maybe having obesity or maybe being severely underweight. That's actually pretty common in the fitness industry. And in their head, anything else that they did prior to tracking macros is just associated with really poor results. A good example of this was this really big YouTube channel, which I follow, and I really like, by the way. And the guy was basically making a video on what happens when you don't track macros. And I think the title of the video was, "Do you need to track calories to be lean?" or something like that. And his main conclusion was that, yes, you do need to track calories if you want to be lean. And then for the rest of the video, he proceeded to talk about the obesity epidemic. Now, Maybe this is a controversial statement that I'm about to make, I don't know, but obesity is not a problem that arises from not tracking macros, okay? If you take a look at someone with obesity and their diet, and you're seeing 3 pizzas and 3 chocolate bars and a jar of Nutella and all of those things, you don't need to track macros to know that that's not a great diet to have. And I'm not trying to bash people with obesity by any means. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I know it fully well that obesity is a culmination of a lot of factors. So it's disordered eating patterns, psychological factors, dysregulated hunger signals. So it's a lot of stuff, and arguably it's terrible eating habits. But the statement that not tracking macros results in obesity is just very, very absurd. And honestly, I don't even understand how a rational person who thinks about that stuff can make such a claim. But I will give you another example. So when I'm going to a restaurant and I'm in this fuck it sort of mode and I'm having 2 appetizers and then I have my main dish and then I finish my girlfriend's plate and then maybe I have some dessert after that, I don't need to know what the macros are to know that that was a bad idea. Okay, so I can track it down and see that, oh my God, it was 4,800 calories. Ooh, what have I done? But I know that it was bad anyway. And I know that if I want to be lean, then that is not a sustainable strategy. Now, I will say that if you want to have good results with this, with autoregulatory eating or just not tracking macros and not just okay results, so if you want to be lean and not just not fat, then calorie awareness is a very critical skill to have. So knowing the energy densities of different foods, knowing that almonds and cashews, they're super nutritious, but they have like 600 calories per 100 gram, and you can chug that down in 30 seconds. Knowing that vegetables and grains have a 10 to 30-fold difference in their energy density. Knowing that a healthy meal like steak and vegetables, you can make that 1,000 calorie more or less by how much oil you're using for cooking. That's a very, very critical skill set to have. And I would say that anybody who wants to get into this and wants to make autoregulated eating work, they're best off at least for 2 weeks meticulously tracking their macros, because the knowledge you gain by doing that will be with you for life. Okay, so if you want to use this strategy and you want to be lean and not just at a healthy body weight, then this is a very critical skill to have. But the claim that not tracking macros results in obesity, that is just obscenely silly. So you can show pictures of food to people who have nothing to do with fitness whatsoever, and they will be able to tell you which one is healthier, which one is probably more conducive to weight loss. Okay, so a jar of Nutella versus a salad, candy versus fruits. People know. The third point that I wanted to address is that not tracking macros and not tracking calories is not the same thing as pretending that calories don't exist. All right, so there is a big difference between not tracking something and sticking your head in the sand. So autoregulated eating is not having a license to just eat whatever and having no diet structure and having all kinds of funky eating habits and just thinking that by some goodwill or fate or hand of God, you will still have great body composition results. No. In fact, I would say that done right, autoregulated eating has a lot more in common with macro tracking than you might think. So take me, for example. Right now, I've been getting gradually leaner. I've been doing this for almost 3 months. And right now, I'm not tracking my macros, just like I have not been tracking my macros for 3.5 years, except for a 3-month period once where I was getting shredded. But if I was to track my macros and I was to set up my diet based on those numbers, my resulting diet from that would be very, very similar to what I'm doing right now. In fact, it might be the exact same thing. So autoregulatory eating and not tracking macros does not mean getting a get out of jail free card. You're not really getting out of jail. You're just picking a different prison. Okay, that's a really bad thing to say. I don't mean it like that. It's not that bad. It's not a prison, but to some extent, if you want to be lean, if you want to have abs, you can never really fully get away from the fact that you will need to be more structured, more thoughtful, and more disciplined than the average person who doesn't care about any of that. So autoregulated eating does not mean not having structure. It does not mean not eating a healthy, satiating diet, and it is definitely not a free-for-all. All right, so that was the third point that I wanted to address. And the fourth point that I want to address is that you can achieve a lot more with autoregulated eating than you would think, but probably still not as much as with macro tracking. All right, so In this point, basically, I just want to give you some realistic expectations of what you can reasonably expect to achieve if you don't track your macros. And I just want to preface this by saying that, of course, everybody is different. Some people are naturally leaner, some people are naturally fatter, people's appetites differ. So what might be a very impressive leanness achievement for someone might be way undershooting it for someone else. But on average, I would say that most people can get beach lean without tracking macros. All right? So beach lean, not shredded, not veins coming out everywhere, not your whole body feels like the back of your hand level leanness. No, I mean having visible abs, maybe not without flexing. Without flexing, maybe it's just the outline of your abs and a flat stomach, but with flexing visible abs, that's what I'm talking about. If you want to get considerably leaner than that, you can achieve that without macro tracking. Never say never. But I would say that I personally would not feel comfortable doing that without macro tracking, even though I have gotten leaner than what I can reasonably sustain in the long term. But if you want to be super, super lean without macro tracking, I would say that the benefits, the practical and the mental benefits you're getting out of not tracking your macros are starting to disappear. And I would say that you're probably actually better off tracking. Because if you want to get to, say, 7% body fat, then you want to control your deficit pretty specifically and pretty closely, because you don't want that to be too big or too small, even on a daily basis. So controlling things tightly and controlling all the variables becomes much, much more important. All right, but down to a nice aesthetic kind of beach lean level leanness, it is totally doable without macro tracking. And I think a useful way to think about this is that your body and your body fat levels are sort of moving in between different zones. So you have what I would call your nice sort of homeostatic zone. And within this zone, your body feels good. So you have good energy levels, good cognition, good sex drive, your appetite is not off the charts, you're not too food focused, and this homeostatic zone probably moves within a pretty sizable range. So in terms of body fat, that could move in between a 7 to 10% range. So for you, that could be a zone between 12% body fat and 22% body fat. Or it could be 15 and 25% body fat, but you get what I mean. And if you're just modifying your food selection, so you start eating a healthy, satisfying, satiating diet with whole foods, not an overly high energy density, you start employing some good eating habits, good diet structure, then probably you can gravitate to the lower end of this range without a lot of effort. It sort of just happens naturally. You naturally get into that calorie deficit because your energy intake just autoregulates itself to that, and you never feel too deprived, too restricted. You never feel like you have to exert a ton of effort. And I think we see this in real life a lot. And I think this is where a lot of these anecdotes or ideas come from, that you see, calories don't matter because I just started eating these foods and I just got naturally leaner. And yeah, from their perspective, it makes sense because they never felt like they have to restrict. They never felt like they are actually cutting back on their calories, and it just sort of happened. Now, of course, we know better, and we know that it was the calorie deficit that did it, but it is true that you don't necessarily have to feel like you were dieting to achieve that. So that is within that nice homeostatic zone. And of course, the flip side of this also applies. So if you start eating a really crappy diet with a lot of hyper-palatable, calorie-dense foods, then you might gravitate to the higher end of this range, even though you might not feel that you're actively force-feeding yourself or violently stuffing your face. All right? Now, if you want to get outside of this nice homeostatic range, so you want to get above that or below that, then you will have to bypass these homeostatic mechanisms. So if you want to bypass this range on the way up, then you will either have to force feed yourself, which is something that you might want to do if you want to go up several weight classes in powerlifting or strongman or something like that, or disordered eating patterns can also do the trick, quote unquote. And if you want to bypass this on the lower end, then you will have to push through your body's comfort zone, and you will have to put up with more hunger. And now we are slowly starting to exhaust the limits of what autoregulatory eating can accomplish. So that is the point where most people are better off tracking their macros. And of course, bodybuilding contest prep is a prime example of that. Now, I can tell you that I have pushed my body past the point where I would normally naturally kind of settle, and I have gotten leaner than that, but I can tell you that it was not even truly autoregulatory eating at that point. I was not tracking my macros, but my energy intake was not really autoregulating itself because I was hungry, and many days I just willed myself through that hunger. And I said, you know what? I am pretty freaking hungry, but that was enough. That's all I'm gonna eat today. So you can do it, but like I said, you're not really getting any meaningful benefits from not tracking your macros at that point. And I think a great case study for this is Eric Helms. So Eric Helms has not been tracking his macros for many years now. I remember I talked to him about this in 2015 when I started this whole YouTube fitness thing. And then he said that he has not been tracking his macros for 5 years at this point. So at this point, he has a lot of experience with that. And he manages his off season without macro tracking. He even does some mini cuts without macro tracking. And guess what? Even his contest prep, the initial stages of that, he was doing without tracking his macros. So he got pretty freaking lean without macro tracking. And at that point, when he wanted to go from lean to shredded and diced, then he switched over to macro tracking. And I think that's a perfectly viable way of doing it for many people. So basically, that's all the misconception or clarifiable things that I wanted to address in this video. And in the next one, I'm probably going to be talking about some of the pros and cons and how macro tracking directly compares with autoregulatory eating. So there are some benefits to macro tracking which are irrefutable, and there are some things which could make someone decide that macro tracking is just better for them. And like I will elaborate on that in that next video, I definitely don't think that macro tracking is necessarily an unsustainable strategy, even for the long term, even as a lifelong strategy potentially. However, I do think there are some distinct and significant benefits to eating this way, so autoregulating your energy intake and not tracking macros, which are also worth mentioning. So that's what I'm going to be talking about next time. And like I said, this is going to be a series. So I'm also going to be getting into specific strategies or what are the actual ways of making this work. And I think this is going to be cool. So I hope you're looking forward to that next video. But this is what I wanted to say in this particular one. And let's see if the algorithm actually likes this. And I'm going to be reaching more people by splitting these videos up to more parts. But that's all I wanted to say in this video. Check out the links in the video description for coaching or consultations or any other stuff, Instagram, whatever. So yeah, see you next time.